Okay, welcome back, everybody. Let's see, we'll call this hearing back to order, and I believe we are at cross-examination by Vote Solar. Mr. Cully.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Listen, Ms. Bateman, I'm sorry I didn't come with anything for you today, so you can have a little relaxation spell here.
That is fine.
And Mr. Gartitego, I wanted to just ask you a few things. You remember we had a conversation not more than a week or two ago.
I do.
And I had some questions about your decision-making, in particular on the decision to switch from the basic customer method to the minimum system method. You remember that?
I do.
And also on the decision to attempt to collect 100% of the customer-related costs in the BFC. You remember that as well?
I do.
Okay. Now, are you aware that your rate design witnesses in both the DEC and this case, in their rebuttal testimony, recommended or at least acknowledged that a residential demand charge might be appropriate?
Yes, but I don't think that was a recommendation to be implemented in this case. They were just carrying the argument being made by some of the interveners to the logical conclusion. But that's not what we're recommending in this case.
And was that a decision by those witnesses individually, or was that a decision that you made to include that in their testimony?
No, I think it was by the witnesses to explain what happens if you accept the arguments being made by the interveners.
Okay, but as you sit here today, you could say it's not the position of the company that in the next rate case you're going to seek a demand charge for residential customers.
I'd say no, I haven't thought about it next case, trust me.
Okay. And I believe we had some exchange about whether a decision had been made at this point to collect 100% of the customer costs through the BFC in the future. And would you still say that's the case? You have not made a decision whether that will be the policy of the company?
Yes, we haven't made a decision, but I'll tell you this. I mean, given how this has played out, I do agree that I should have been more intentional about moving towards the appropriate basic facilities charge in a more gradual manner.
Okay, thank you for that. And that brings me to page 4 of your summary today. And I believe, actually, to be precise, this is a combined summary. So page 4, kind of this third to last paragraph there, I'll just read it. In ongoing conversations with customers and listening to testimony at public hearings, and after reading relevant testimony and comments filed by interveners and customers, we continue to hear the concerns of our customers. So would you agree that in making adjustments to the BFC, in this case, you were being reactive?
Yes, the new position, yes.
And are there steps that you could take before the next case to be proactive in determining what customers want to see in their rate schedules?
We could certainly have focus groups and that kind of thing. You know, we do talk to customers all the time, and large customers, small, medium business customers, residential customers.
Right.
But I'll tell you, residential customers typically are not focused on rate design. At least the ones I talk to, they're focused on what's my total bill.
Now, speaking of residential customers, are you familiar with a study that was commissioned? Duke Energy was one of the utilities. I think it was a combination of 5 other utilities that participated in this. It was EPRI, the EPRI. Are you familiar with that study?
No.
Okay,
I'm familiar with EPRI, but not that.
Okay, so you have not reviewed the results of that study?
No, I have not.
So none of the decisions you made about adjusting the BFC in this case depended on any results from that, because you have not seen
No.
It. Okay. I think I have no more questions. So thank you. Actually, I do have one more question. Who would be the most appropriate witness to discuss that study with? Do you know?
Steve Wheeler, maybe.
All right. Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you. NAACP, SCCCL, Upstate Forever. Mr. Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And is the Elmo overhead projector on? Okay, great. Thank you.
Glad we're going to get to use the Elmo.
Oh, we're going to try.
I kept my grandson the other night. You know You can watch Elmo, the fuzzy red one, at 2 o'clock in the morning.
I don't think this Elmo can be tickled, but we'll see. So, Mr. Gartetego, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you, sir.
Similar to Mr. Cully, I think it's inherent there might be some questions today that'll be reminiscent of a discussion we had in the Duke Carolinas rate case. So bear with me. Just to start, you would agree that the burden is on your company in this case to justify its proposed rate increases. Isn't that right?
I agree with that.
And I think we got to this last time. I'll just make sure. You would agree that the only justification that your company has provided for the increase in the basic facilities charge came from the use of the minimum system methodology in the cost of service study. Isn't that right?
I would say and witness Wheeler explains the justification for the level of basic facilities charge we initially proposed. And it's multifold. One is to eliminate the cross-subsidization that we viewed existed in the class. The other was to send the appropriate price signals. And I know the debate is about how you get there and the methodology that underlies this, but those were the motivating factors, among other things.
But you don't see a cross-subsidization of the nature that Mr. Wheeler described unless you use the minimum system methodology. Isn't that right?
Well, not to the degree you see in this case, yes.
In fact, and just to draw a line under this, outside of the use of that methodology, can you point to any other basis for the company's initial proposal to take the basic facilities charge to $29?
No, the minimum system study is what supports it.
Thank you. And sort of continuing on another theme, is it fair to say that you were surprised by some of the public outcry to the initial proposed increase in the basic facilities charge?
That's fair to say, yes.
And Mr. Gartetego, who at Duke Energy Progress was responsible for studying the potential impact of that increase, basic facilities charge, on residential customers?
Well, I'm not sure there was a study conducted. I think every time you design rates, you look at the basic principles that have been articulated here and in other places. I think Bumbright is one that was cited in one of the testimonies in this case. And they lay out those principles. So we keep that in mind. I know those are not necessarily rules, but you keep those things in mind as you design rates. But again, keep in mind, you're also designing rates for an entire class. Mm-hmm. One of those principles, too, is that one class is not benefited unfairly to the expense of another group of customers. So you try to factor all that in. But no, we did not go hire anybody or put a team together to go door to door trying to find out, the reaction that we would get in this case.
So, as I understand your answer, there was nobody at the company who took it upon themselves to evaluate how that proposed increase might affect residential customers or their ability to pay their bills.
I think we considered it, but I'm saying you mentioned a study, and maybe I'm thinking of a study as something more comprehensive and intricate than you mean it. But we did think about how would this impact customers.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is you were surprised by the public reception. And so what I'm really trying to get at is who at the company might have helped you be prepared for the reception that you got, who might have analyzed how that could have impacted the residential customers.
No, we didn't do that kind of an analysis or a study. We did. Okay. We've been in enough rate cases to know changes in the basic facilities charge are always unpopular.
And you testified in your direct back on page 26 that even with the proposed rate adjustment, even with the initial basic facilities charge, that customers would pay competitive rates. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And again, we've had this discussion in the Duke Carolinas case. You recognize that the basic facilities charge initially proposed would have been the highest in the country for an investor-owned utility.
Well, I heard that from a witness, but again, I think customers tend to focus on their total bill or the average rate. When you do rate comparisons, that's typically what you see.
Well, and you also referenced, I believe, in your summary and the surrebuttal testimony of ORS witness Seaman Wynn. Are you familiar with? Let's see, I might have to zoom this in. Hold on. Are you familiar with the surrebuttal exhibit that Mr. Seaman Wynn provided with his testimony, Exhibit MSH-5 from his surrebuttal?
Yes, I saw that.
And so you saw that where it says the DEP schedule RES company proposed on the second line of $140.39 for, and again, this is for a tip, what was described as a typical customer that uses 1,000 kilowatt hours a month, that is $15, approximately $15 higher than the South Atlantic 2017 average, again, from the total bill. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. Another discussion that we had in the DEC case was about an area of concern that you repeated in your rebuttal testimony in this case. And this was a concern that you expressed that parties seem to assume the change in the basic facilities charge is additive. Do you recall that discussion?
Yes.
And you would agree with me that there's nothing in the testimony of either Mr. Wallach or Mr. Howitt in this case that indicated that confusion. Isn't that right?
Yes.
You also testified that a benefit of the 220% increase in the fixed charges is that it would, and I'm quoting, reduce volumetric swings, and again quoting, have a smoothing effect on rates. Do you recall your testimony to that effect?
I do.
But the company's proposed increase in fixed charges doesn't eliminate seasonal fluctuation in bills, does it?
No, I think the operative word you used was reduce.
Mm-hmm. And the company already offers a way for customers to smooth out their bills, one that doesn't involve increasing the basic facilities charge at all. Isn't that right?
I suppose you mean the equal payment plan, for example?
Yes, exactly. And so you testified on page 30 of your direct that the equal payment plan allows customers to spread out the impacts of seasonal fluctuations into 12 equal monthly payments. Isn't that right?
Yes. But I would say not all customers participate in the equal payment plan.
But it's open to all residential
It is
customers.
open to all customers, yes.
Switching to some of the comments made, I guess, in your direct, responding to some of the comments from the public hearings, is it fair to say you describe the company's investments in low-income energy efficiency programs like the Neighborhood Energy Saver as a way that the company is trying to mitigate rate impacts?
Yes.
And do you recall in the testimony of John Howitt a reference to a study by the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy that reviewed the 51 largest investor-owned utilities in the country? Do you recall his testimony to that effect?
Generally, I do, not specifically.
And you would agree that the energy efficiency programs that Duke Energy Progress offers in South Carolina are the same as the programs they offer in North Carolina?
Yes.
And so you are aware that the 2017 Utility Energy Efficiency Scorecard from the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, or ACEEE, rated Duke Energy Progress North Carolina among the bottom of all the 51 utilities in terms of its investment in low-income energy efficiency programs?
I am not aware of that. I do know that Duke Energy was recently named, actually, by an environmental group, I don't have it with me, as among the best in energy efficiency programs.
And again, I'm referring specifically to the Duke Energy Progress low income or income qualified energy efficiency programs.
Yeah, I'm not aware of the study you're referring to.
You also testified in your rebuttal that the proposed basic facilities charge ensures that other customers are not subsidizing low usage customers, such as customers with vacation or second homes. Do you recall that?
I do.
But you don't have any information about how many of your residential accounts are for second homes, do you?
I don't.
Or vacation homes, right?
No, but we know they exist.
They exist, but you don't have any data about how many there are in your service territory.
No.
And but you do have some data about how many of your residential customers are economically impoverished, don't you?
Well, I know, I believe it's Witness Wheeler who does an analysis on rebuttal using some internally generated studies, using $30,000 as some threshold. So I know we've done some of that type of analysis, yes. We certainly, when a customer signs up for service, we don't ask them whether you're low income or high.
And was the analysis that you just referred to from Mr. Wheeler, was that done before the company proposed the 220% increase in the basic facilities charge, or somewhere later down the road?
I believe it was done before, and you can verify that with him. Okay.
Yeah. But as president of Duke Energy in South Carolina, are you aware of the demographics of the residential customers in the Progress service territory?
Generally aware of it, yes. I travel the territory regularly.
Would you be surprised that 36.5% of the residential population in the Progress territory in South Carolina is at or below 150% of the federal poverty level?
I would not.
And would you agree that that's higher than South Carolina as a whole?
I don't know that for a fact, but that wouldn't surprise me.
And again, you referenced some of that chart that was in Mr. Wheeler's rebuttal. Is this what you were referring to?
Yes.
And again, as I understand your testimony, this chart or this information was available to the company before they made their decision to increase the basic facility charges. Is that right?
Yes, I believe so.
And so that means the company had this information of households where they're earning $30,000 a year or less that are using anywhere from 100 kilowatt hours a month, 200 kilowatt hours a month, or 300 kilowatt hours a month, right? I mean, just that's part of what this is showing.
Yes.
And so you recognize that the original proposal for customers and that, for customers who are using about 300 kilowatt hours a month would have seen those bills go up by 50% or more just from the basic facilities charge.
Yes.
And do you know how many of those DEP customers who earn less than $30,000 a year are disconnected for inability to pay?
I do not know that.
And do you know how many are charged late fees?
I do not know that.
Do you know how many of those customers are behind in paying their utility bills?
I do not know that.
All right. Finally, returning again to the theme of some of the steps the company has taken to mitigate ratepayer impacts, you also mentioned some of the charitable programs the company has undertaken. Isn't that right?
I do, yes.
And again, are you familiar with a program that Duke Energy Progress and Carolinas in North Carolina has undertaken called the Helping Home Fund?
Yes.
And I believe, Ms. Bateman, you're also familiar with the Helping Home Fund.
Generally.
And I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that initially Duke Energy Progress made a $10 million contribution at the launch of the Helping Home Fund, which is a program that augments the weatherization assistance programs, whole house weatherization efforts in North Carolina. Isn't that right?
I don't know the exact amount, but I do know that there was a settlement in our 2012 North Carolina rate case that did include reversing some cost of removal liability from the company and making a donation to that account.
And Ms. Bateman, are you aware of additional shareholder contributions that have been made by Duke Energy Progress to the Helping Home Fund since that time?
I'm not personally familiar, but it wouldn't surprise me.
And again, Mr. Gartetego, have you considered the possibility of Duke Energy Progress in South Carolina making a similar kind of contribution from shareholder funds to something like a Helping Home Fund to improve weatherization assistance to low-income customers?
I have not at this time. But I will say most of the time, those are in the context of a settlement, and trying to resolve a whole case. So all those become factors in your consideration of whether to settle the case and so forth and so on.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Sierra Club. Mr. Guile, I don't think we count you as the farm team, so.
I demoted myself, Mr. Chairman.
I hear you.
Had some help from out of state. It was good. Good afternoon, Mr. Gartetego.
Good afternoon.
Pleasure to have an opportunity to talk to you this afternoon. Well, some of what we experience is kind of deja vu because you testified in the Carolinas case, and many of us either actively participated or, like myself, got to enjoy listening to your testimony and that of others. But time marches on, and so I have some new material for you that reflects events that have transpired since we last had an opportunity to talk. Fair to say, isn't it, that your testimony, even before the night hearings, reflected your recognition of the magnitude of the impact of your proposed rate hikes on your residential customers?
Yes.
And that even before the night hearings, you recognized and expressed the eagerness to take steps to mitigate those impacts on customers.
That's correct.
Can we agree that a significant portion of the costs that are behind this proposed increase are reflected in the cost to manage your coal plant coal ash or your coal combustion residuals?
Yes, it is a significant portion of our request.
Right. And a portion of your testimony's references to mitigation measures was, in this case, you proposed to spread some $50 million of coal ash management costs over a period of 5 years instead of imposing them in a single year, correct?
That's correct.
But that $50 million in coal ash residual management costs reflects only costs that have incurred by your company up to a certain date, not costs that are continuing or costs that are expected in the future, correct?
That's correct.
And do you know offhand what the cutoff date was for that $50 million figure, roughly?
December 2018.
The end of the test year?
No.
No, the end of the test period is December 2017.
I'm sorry, you're right. Okay, so you have brought them up to the most recent end of calendar year.
We included, in my supplemental testimony, I included actuals through December 2018.
Fine, thank you. Now, that brings us to where we left off after the Duke Energy Carolinas proceeding, because on the 1st of April, the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality issued orders that require significant additional costs in terms of managing coal combustion residuals at several identified coal ash ponds in North Carolina. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Right. And I'm glad we have our friend Elmo here, because I'm going to put up a screenshot of your. This is a Duke Energy release, dated press release, at least a screenshot from the web. April 1st, 2019, responding to those orders by the North Carolina DEQ. And you familiar with the fact the company issued a release on that date?
Yes.
And I want to draw your attention to, and if I can make this work, I've got a yellow highlight, and let me see if I can dot it in. read that?
No,
Oh,
sir.
highlight.
No, sir.
This is a test, okay. I can't
I
either.
wish I had brought my distance glasses, but I did not today.
Well, it's just aging eyes on my part. But, I will then snatch this back and read it so I can focus as well. And just ask if you'd accept, subject to check, that this was the company's publication on that subject at that time. Quote, based on current estimates and closure timeframes, excavating these basins will add approximately $4 billion to $5 billion to the current estimate of $5.6 billion for the Carolinas. That is the cost of coal combustion residuals remediation. You have to answer orally so she can take you out. Is that right?
I'm not sure what the question is.
Oh, I'm sorry. That is the company statement, is it not?
It is.
Now, that just to round it out today, your company announced that you are appealing that decision, those decisions, correct?
That's correct.
And can we agree that those decisions involved some six remaining coal ash ponds in North Carolina?
Correct.
All right, and I'm just going to read them. Allen active and retired ash basins, that's one of them, or two of them, correct?
Correct.
Blues Creek, Cliffside, Rogers active, correct?
Correct.
Unit 5 ash basins, Marshall, Mayo, Roxborough East, and West ash basins, correct?
Correct.
Located in 7 counties of North Carolina spread across your service territory, correct?
Correct. Not all of them are in Duke Energy Progress service territory.
No, but they're in Duke Energy territory, correct?
They are.
Okay. Understood. Now, if I understand the technology, I just want to, briefly try to reach an understanding with the commission about what this involves. Coal plants generally are located next to rivers or streams because they need a source of cooling water, correct?
Generally, yes. I'll say, we have witness Karen coming up, witness Julie Turner. They know more about how to run coal plants.
And my co-counsel knows more about them too, so maybe she'll have a chance to ask those people questions. But just between you and me on a higher order, the coal ash ponds are also located typically adjacent to rivers and streams.
Typically, yes.
And oftentimes they're right next to a river or stream separated by a levee or a bank, an embankment between the pond and the river, correct?
Yes.
And the typical practice that Duke followed, which I don't dispute was not uncommon in the industry, was to use a wet ash management system that moved a slurry of ash to an unlined pond at those locations, correct?
I believe that's correct.
When I say unlined pond, I mean basically a pit that doesn't have what today would be thought of as a synthetic liner or a bentonite clay liner. No liner at all, just an unlined pit next to the river, correct?
Correct.
Right. And those ponds, Duke's, as in the case of many other electric utilities, have experienced leaks below the base of the ponds into groundwater below the site. That's common, isn't it?
I don't know that.
Is it common for your system?
I mean, I know it happens, but I don't know that that's the case every time.
And it has happened in your system, has it not?
Maybe at one or two sites. I don't know. You may want to talk to Mr. Karen about that.
All right. Well, you're also aware that it's not only happened at one or two sites, but in addition to the unlined ponds leaking below the ponds into groundwater, there have also been instances of seeps or springs leaking on the side of the ponds directly into the rivers. North Carolina DEQ has found in several instances where Duke Energy has had those failures of your ponds, haven't they?
That's correct.
And
I will assure the Commission no fines or penalties or costs associated with those I included in this case.
Indeed. But indeed, there were fines and penalties imposed on you by the North Carolina DEQ for allowing seeps from your coal ash ponds into adjacent water bodies in some of your sites in North Carolina. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Now, when you estimate that excavating the coal ash residuals from the wet ponds that, pursuant to this DEQ order, is estimated to impose an additional $5 to $6 billion in costs, those are costs that at some later date you would seek recovery from South Carolina ratepayers.
I think what you read said 4 to 5. And what you read earlier, I thought said 4 to 5. But in any event, yes,
you're absolutely correct. I apologize. $4 to $5 billion. You're right.
Yeah, but in any event, we believe that compliance with environmental regulations, whether propounded or whether established by North Carolina or South Carolina, is all cost of service, because those power plants were run to generate electricity that was used to serve customers in North Carolina as well as South Carolina.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and the natural byproduct of burning coal is coal ash residuals. And so environmental regulations associated with how you deal with that is part of the cost of service.
Yes, but in short, stand corrected, the $4 to $5 billion additional cost estimate that Duke has published for excavating the coal ash residuals from these ponds, those are costs that you would seek to recover from your ratepayers, correct?
That's correct.
Now, can we agree that if the coal ash didn't get disposed of in these unlined ponds in the first place, that the cost of managing the ash from coal production might be significantly less than it will be if you have to excavate these ponds?
I don't agree with that.
Well, put it this way, don't you, well, you do agree, don't you, in your appeal, in your announcement of your appeal, you state explicitly that simply capping these ponds is your preferred alternative, and that would be far less expensive than excavating the waste and taking it to a lined landfill elsewhere.
Correct. Yes.
So
these sites, yes.
Yes. So it follows, doesn't it, that if you didn't put the wet ash in the pond in the first place, but instead sent it to a lined landfill before it went into the unlined pond, the cost of management would be less, wouldn't it?
No, I mean, you're talking about ash that's been accumulated over decades and second-guessing what we should have done 70 years ago. I don't know what the cost would have been then or what the impact on customers would have been.
You can't accept that it would be less expensive to have managed it properly in the first place.
I do not accept that it was managed improperly. I think it was managed properly.
Well, in fact, you say, indeed, that you've managed your waste consistent with regulations which have evolved since that time. That's your testimony, isn't it?
That's correct.
But indeed, Duke has not managed its coal ash ponds consistent with regulatory requirements at all times, have they?
There have been violations, and that you've already noted them with the seeps and so forth, yes.
In fact, not just the penalties in North Carolina for the seeps, but Duke Energy pled guilty to criminally negligent violations of the Federal Clean Water Act for its coal ash management practices at a number of its coal ponds in its system, didn't it?
Yeah, we pled guilty, yes, to a violation of the Clean Water Act.
Criminally negligent violation of the Clean Water Act.
Yes, which is a strict liability statute.
Yes, indeed. That reflects instances where you certainly didn't act consistent with regulatory requirements. And you acknowledge that.
Yes.
Now, you volunteered again, as you did in your testimony, that you're not seeking recovery from the South Carolina Commission for any fines or penalties incurred for your coal ash management violations in this proceeding, correct?
Correct.
But despite the fact that you didn't seek fines or penalties in the North Carolina companion cases, the North Carolina Utilities Commission imposed a mismanagement fine, a fine for mismanaging your coal ash of some $30 million.
Correct.
Now,
but again, I would say that was the Commission's determination. They cited, I believe, 3 instances, and I don't think that reflects mismanagement of an entire fleet of coal combustion basins.
I would say that, right? Now, I take it that it's your general contention that costs incurred for coal ash management, that is, costs included in costs for excavating coal ash from your coal ash ponds, or otherwise closing those ponds, capping them, say, for example, those costs, as incurred to date, have been prudently incurred by Duke Energy.
Correct, and that's why we're requesting a recovery of those.
I'm sorry, finish?
That's why we're requesting recovery of those costs.
And that's why if you're required to excavate the additional ponds as the North Carolina DEQ has ordered, you would assert that it would be prudent to have those costs charged to South Carolina ratepayers in a future proceeding.
Yes.
Now, when I say prudent, we've had some experience with this commission in talking about the concept of prudence. You alluded to it in your summary. When you're talking about $9 or $10 billion, you start ringing some bells in South Carolina. And I ask you whether or not it's your contention that your coal ash management practices are prudent in this sense. Did Duke take all reasonable, prudent steps to avoid, minimize, or mitigate the costs of managing your coal ash?
I believe so, and I think this appeal we announced today is part of those steps.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. South Carolina energy users. No question. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Nucor. Thank you, sir. Office of Regulatory Staff.
I have just a few questions, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gartitego.
Mr. Bateman.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Could the ROE awarded by the Commission in this proceeding potentially affect your total compensation?
In a very, very indirect way, but actually, I take that back. No. Because my compensation, part of my compensation is incentive-based, and I think this is where you're getting to it. Part of it, that incentive, is achieving a certain level of earnings per share. The earnings per share is a calculation of how much profit the company actually makes. It's not based on the allowed ROE. It's how much money the company actually makes divided by the number of shares we have outstanding. I will add, the earnings we make is also a component of both revenue and costs. And so to the extent that I work hard to reduce costs, I actually turn out well because the earnings will be better. And that's why it baffles me that the IRS will think earnings per share is a shareholder-focused metric, when in fact, reducing costs, keeping costs low, is directly related to the cost that our customers bear.
Okay. Switching gears a bit from that, I'd like to ask you a few questions about the company's stipulation with Nucor. Could you briefly explain to me what the company agreed to with Nucor?
Very briefly, the settlement with Nucor was that we would each, essentially one of the proposals in this case is to take some portion of the excess deferred income taxes reserve that was going to go back to customers. We had proposed to essentially use it to offset deferred costs associated with a distributed energy program. And the agreement and the settlement essentially allows for less than we had originally proposed. Only about half would go to defer those costs, and the other half would go through other means to customers. That's one element of the settlement. I think the other one has to do with cost allocation and meetings or cooperation associated with future cases. But I think all customers actually do benefit from the settlement.
Is there anything that the company agreed to with Nucor not written in the stipulation?
Well, yeah, there is a memorandum of understanding that lays out having meetings and other engagement, customer engagement, before we file the next case.
And meetings or customer engagement, anything that would potentially or that does impact customers?
There's no commitment, as I understand it, and Witness Bateman might be able to help me here. There is no commitment in the agreement that directly impacts customers that I'm aware of.
Mr. Gartitego, we've talked a little bit about the Phase 1 and Phase 2 rates earlier from the 2016-227E case. Regarding DEP's phase-in of rates, isn't it correct that Phase 1 occurred, I think it was January 1, 2017?
I'm not.
Are you asking me or?
Were you suggesting I talked about that?
I may have been mistaken. I did think that we talked about it, not you and I, but
May have been in your opening statement, but I don't think it was part of my test.
the question may be better directed to Ms. Bateman. Ms. Bateman, was it January 1, 2017 for the initial phase-in of rates?
Yeah, so the rate increase started January 1, 2017, and then there was an additional step up 1/1 of 2018.
That's right. And, Mr. Chairman, I believe that's outlined in Commission Order 2016-871. I would just ask that the Commission take judicial notice of that order.
We will take judicial notice.
Thank you. And Mr. Bateman, not Mr. Bateman, Ms. Bateman, excuse me.
That's Mr. Bateman.
Isn't it true
This is
that,
getting confusing for me.
for me as well, Chairman, isn't it true that DEP does not have a storm damage reserve fund?
That is correct.
I think that is everything I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Bateman. Mr. Bateman. Commissioners. Commissioner Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was interested in hearing your earlier testimony about the projected cost of that was ordered by the North Carolina Commission to completely remove all the coal ash. And what was your estimate of cost as you understand it?
An additional $4 to $5 billion.
Because today's Charlotte Observer says that, according to Duke Energy, it could go up to as much as $10.6 billion. Were you aware of that statement?
I'm not aware. I haven't read the Observer, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was a reference to the total costs when you add that 4 to 6 to existing costs that we've calculated.
Yes.
But again, this is all cost too that could change because the work hasn't started yet.
Correct. And isn't it also true that there is pending in the North Carolina General Assembly legislation that would allow for securitization of certain costs that have been incurred by Duke Carolina?
I believe it's legislation related to storm costs.
Storm damage costs.
Frankly, would love to pursue that here as well.
Yes, sir. I was going to ask, that was going to be my next question.
There is actually a securitization bill that's been introduced in the Senate, and we're working with a sponsor to see if it could be expanded to include storm costs.
Because that would have the effect, could have, and most likely would have the effect of reducing customer rates for those reimbursements.
Absolutely, and that's why in this case, we actually pulled out all storm costs. You know, we've been deferring storm costs for years. We have 2014 storm costs on our books. And we pulled it out of this case and not asking customers to pay for it now because we think going in that direction could potentially save customers money.
Millions of dollars, maybe billions.
I don't know, potentially.
Potentially.
It all depends on what the size of
Right.
what you're securitizing.
Sure.
And how long you're spreading it out over.
Well, has Duke Energy given any thought to using securitization as a tool to address the coal ash cost in the future?
I do know about a year ago when I was in legal, it was something I thought about, but no, we haven't pursued that.
Theoretically, there's no legal impediment. I mean, you could do that. You could use it for that.
In theory, you could, yes.
And I suspect that it could be used for other costs like grid improvements. Is that part of the legislation in North Carolina?
No, it's not part of it. I think the North Carolina legislation is limited to storms.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that you're at least considering it for South Carolina because, as we heard in earlier cases, not this one, but we've heard that there is substantial cost savings using that tool, and we currently don't have securitization as a part of our law in South Carolina, as you know. So,
You don't. Just to be clear, I said I have thought about it before,
Yes, sir.
but it's not part of the
I
conversation.
understand. I understand. But it could become a part of the conversation, assuming we got it passed in South Carolina.
Yes.
On page 31 of your testimony,
Like direct or
I
rebuttal?
believe it's your direct testimony,
would be
notes here. You tout the company's top quartile performance in the J.D. Power Electric Utility Residential Study. And you mentioned that earlier today and
Yes, sir.
answer your attorney's questions. And you're to be congratulated on that. It's a very good record. But my question is, on page 22 of your testimony, you also promote the AMI technology that would reconnect customers faster during power outages and perhaps improve information related to outages. I guess my question is, since you already have demonstrated such a great service record based on the J.D. Power residential study, do you really need further investments to improve this type of customer service? I mean, you're already doing very well. You're near the top of the nation. How do you justify more cost at this time?
I would say absolutely, because customer expectations continue to change. We have customers who are used to shopping on Amazon using an app. And until recently, there was no Duke Energy app, for example. So, we customers are getting used to being able to have everything at their fingertips. The opportunity to pick their own due date. That was something we couldn't offer customers without an AMI infrastructure. Today, you can call the company and say, I get paid on the 6th of the month, and I want my bill due on the 6th. And we can make that happen. These are all changing expectations, and my challenge is keeping up with those expectations. And for the most part, keeping up with those expectations requires us to continue to invest to provide reliable, safe, affordable service for our customers.
Has Duke conducted any kind of cost-benefit analysis to determine whether this would result in customers saving any money with this increased investment in IT?
I would defer that to Jay Oliver or Dan Schneider. I would say Dan Schneider. But we know that it will save some money on O&M, for example, because now we do not have to dispatch trucks to do certain things that the AMI can now tell us through computers. So there is some savings in the long run, I believe.
You also state in your testimony that you're using the Itron, am I pronouncing that correctly? Meter? Itron Incorporated AMI meter as your provider.
Yes.
It looks like their online catalog lists several meter models that provide multiple applications, like you talked about, to meet the customer's needs. Did you or someone with Duke look at all the various models and do a comparison to determine whether you're, getting the right one, so to speak?
I would defer that to Mr. Schneider, but I think we're getting the best. But again, with technology, things do change. And as things change, demands change. We may, when it comes to technology, you're always trying to catch up, usually.
Is this the same model of meter that you're rolling out for Duke Energy Progress customers?
I believe so.
So is it system-wide, pretty much the same meter?
It is.
All right.
It is.
Did you get some kind of discount on the economy of scale that way?
I would hope so.
I would hope so as well.
As Snyder can tell.
It's a lot of meters.
Yes, it is.
I want to thank you for your follow-up that you've done, you justified about earlier today about following up with individual customers' complaints that we heard at the hearings. And I think that's important, and I appreciate you and your staff doing that. I think it's a very commendable and responsible action to take. I'm particularly interested in hearing a little bit more information about the farmers. We heard in Florence and in Sumter, but particularly in Florence, from those farmers who felt like they may be misclassified, and you addressed that earlier. You said you identified a certain number of farmers that may benefit from a reduced rate structure. Do you recall about how many there were, or is that available information?
It is, and Mr. Wheeler can give you the specifics, but my recollection is there were about 71 or so who are on MGS, and I believe about 59 could actually switch and save money.
Great.
And we've been calling each one of them.
So you're reaching out to them?
Absolutely.
Great.
And I actually called the Commissioner of Agriculture myself, as well as Mr. Ott. Unfortunately, I did not reach them, but I wanted to give them a heads up that we're doing that.
I think that's great because, as you know, we heard a lot of testimony about your financial struggles with the storms and
Yes.
the tariffs and the other cost drivers, and it's really putting tremendous economic pressure on the farmers in South Carolina, in your area, and of course, any relief will be welcome relief. So I particularly appreciate that.
I agree with that. Thank you.
Those are the questions I had.
Thank you. Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Bateman, Mr. Garte-Tego. A few questions for you two. I would like to echo Commissioner Irvin's commentary regarding following up with your customers. I also appreciate the transparent nature of your presentations today. And I hope you appreciate the Commission's responsibility to ensure that the company meets its burden and that we provide just and reasonable rates. It's all a part of the process, as you know. I had a question, Mr. Garte-Tego. I hope you could educate me on something. Earlier this morning, I can't remember if it was during your summary or during cross-examination. I think you mentioned that the company is currently earning about a 4.1 or maybe 4.5 return on equity.
No, 4.1 overall return on rate base.
Return on rate base. What's the difference?
So when Commission sets rates, it sets a return on rate base because there's a rate of return, cost of service, jurisdiction. And that return on rate base is the return we are allowed to earn on the capital we've invested to provide service. And it's a combination of debt costs as well as equity costs, because this is the way most utilities operate, investor-owned anyway. Every dollar we spent is either borrowed from lenders like banks or from equity shareholders or people who buy our shares. And so the cap structure is a reflection of how much of that cost we've invested was borrowed from banks and lenders or from shares that we sold to shareholders. And each one of these suppliers of capital required to be paid in terms of a return, whether it's a stated interest rate, which is the debt cost, or the return on equity, which is not a stated cost, but this commission sets that level of cost by hearing testimony from witnesses in a case like this. It's essentially the combination of the two that results in your rate of return on rate base that is set as a basis for setting rates in the case. So the return on equity is just one component of the return on rate base that the Commission allows. I think I said that right.
Yes.
So when you're earning a 4.1, what is that indicative of? What could I tell about the company based on that metric or that number?
Exactly, and I should have said that in context. In the last rate case, the Commission allowed us to earn 7.1, which is a reflection of the return on equity of 10.1%, as well as the cost of debt, which I do not remember at this time. So when the utility is earning less than its allowed return on rate base, it means it has a certain amount of cost that it is not recovering through its current rates. And that's when you're prompted to come in to adjust those rates. Sometimes we're able to get by without coming in immediately because of the benefit of deferrals and the ability to earn returns on deferrals, right? So if you enter a world where you're not allowed to defer any costs, or you defer a cost at the detriment to the people who lend you the money, then you get into a world where we'll be more likely to be coming in more frequently to recover costs that have been invested to benefit customers.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that with me. Anything you'd like to add, Ms. Bateman? I don't want to leave you out.
Maybe just refer you to my Bateman Exhibit 1, page 2. I think kind of lays those numbers out and shows the return on equity at the present rates, and then, of course, at the proposed, and that all goes into the calculation of the rate increase in this case that we're requesting.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you.
Mr. Gartego, on page 35 of your pre-filed direct testimony, you mentioned investing approximately $500,000 over the past 3 years in workforce training programs.
Yes.
I was curious to know whether or not that training is exclusively for Duke talent, or is there investments in community organizations or any entity outside of Duke?
No, it's not just for Duke talent. It's for all talent. And I will say, last year we also invested another $1 million to the South Carolina Technical College system to be awarded as grants to technical colleges all over the state to train linemen, which is one area where we have a difficulty hiring enough of, given the amount of work we've got going on. But they're not, those students, once they graduate, don't have to come to work for Duke. They can work, and these are not, I would say, not customer dollars. These are shareholder dollars that are given as donations.
So it's interesting. The company has a problem recruiting and retaining linemen, or just recruiting linemen?
Well, I think there's a retention. There could be a retention issue too. I've heard, and that's not where I spend my time every day, but there are linemen who, or contractors. We use a lot of contractors, particularly when it gets to linemen too, on the distribution system. There are some who will move wherever the work is. So they'll work here a little bit, move to Virginia, move to Ohio if the money is better there. But beyond that, I think most of why we need more is, so we need more with new or additional skills. Because as we deploy things like we proposed in our grid improvement plan, like self-healing networks and so forth and so on, you need the kind of linemen that can manage those and deal with those types of new technologies as well.
Do you know whether or not the majority of your linemen are South Carolina residents?
I do not know that. I do know that, at least for those employed by Duke, we have just a little over 4,000 total employees in the state. But I would say most of them work at our nuclear plants. We have 5 nuclear units in the state. And most of our employees work there. The remainder will probably be in the distribution and transmission business.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bateman, one question for you, or a couple of questions. On page 21 of your direct testimony, you state that the company subtracted $1.5 million from the coal ash deferral balance to exclude South Carolina retail portion of the amount that the North Carolina Utility Commission disallowed. Does this amount include South Carolina's portion of the $30 million mismanagement penalty imposed by the North Carolina Commission?
No, it does not. That is just the South Carolina portion of the a particular prudence disallowance.
Okay. And any reason why why you don't include that?
We didn't agree with the management penalty.
Okay. Does the company agree that the deferral balance noted by the Office of Regulatory Staff, Witness Payne, on page 4 of his surrebuttal testimony, including coal ash, contain both operating and capital-related costs?
On his surrebuttal testimony?
Yes, ma'am.
And what page was that?
Page 4.
So does the coal ash balance include both operating and capital?
Yes, ma'am.
So yes, there is a small piece that the ORS has designated as operating related, and that relates to our capital investments at our operating plants. There is a small portion of depreciation expense, deferred depreciation expense, that results from those capital investments at operating plants. Okay. That the ORS has put in that category.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Whitfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Ms. Bateman, Mr. Gartitego. Got a couple of questions for you, and want to just start off briefly by also reiterating what my colleagues have said. I want to thank you for following up with those customers at the night hearing, and Ms. Smith interjected that here today on the stand, and regardless of where you put it here in this part of the case, or if you do it in the proposed orders, I certainly applaud you for it, for the customers who are struggling, the residential customers who are struggling, and certainly the farmers. And Mr. Gartitego, I hope that the remaining 11 or 12 farmers who are not eligible for the other rate tariff, that you all will follow up with them and try to work with them to help them find a solution, as we know how important agriculture is to this state, and we also realize the seasonal use and nature of their business. So hopefully, maybe perhaps in a proposed order, you could, or toward the end, you could update us as you move forward on that.
Let me say, those 11, and Mr. Wheeler can provide detail on this, but those 11 we believe are best served on the MGS schedule. In other words, their usage is so high that moving them to a different the nature of the operation is such that that's the best rate for them, and then their usage is also so high that the increase in the basic facilities charge really does not impact them the way it does the others.
Well, I certainly appreciate you reaching out to the 59, and hopefully you or your customer service department or some of the folks at the company can work with them to continue to find solutions.
Absolutely. I mean, we will certainly I think one of the concerns they expressed was that they don't have any designated folks to call when they have a need and so forth. So that's something I'm working through right now. We do have large account managers for folks whose accounts are fairly complex, like industrial operations and all of that. We don't have it for the agricultural community, but we do have it for small, medium business. So I will be working through my internal organization to figure out how best to provide them additional service.
Well, I hope so. Sounds like you do have 10 or 11, 12 that don't fit quite the industrial rep person's duties or anyone else. So let's just, hopefully they won't fall through the cracks, so to speak.
Yes, sir.
And well, thank you for that. And I've got a couple of questions for you. Mr. Gartitego, on pages 22 through 24 in your pre-file direct testimony, you discussed the company's proposal for a fee-free credit card program, and we had this came up in the DEC case as well. But with respect to this case, and with respect to your proposal for residential customers not to pay a convenience fee for account payments via some payment channels, you discuss eliminating the fees for residential customers. And aren't you still going to collect those fees, but just from a different pot of customers?
Well, I think the short answer to the question is we don't collect the fees. We use a third party called SpeedPay to handle payments. That third party requires the fee. So that's point number one. So it doesn't go into Duke Energy's pocket. It goes into the third party for a service. They actually provide a service. I will also say that today the other means of payment that do not include a fee, like mailing in a check, like paying by cash, or going to a free pay station, all involve some level of costs. And those costs are included in our total cost of service. What we are proposing is to allow those who choose to pay by credit card and debit card to also do so, much like those who are mailing checks, except that the associated cost with that also be included in cost of service, much like we do for those who pay by check, cash, or the other payment centers.
Well, to keep from using the socializing word, socializing the cost, folks that are paying by check or paying directly like that, aren't you? And I realize the company doesn't get any of those fees, and I know we're talking about a small amount. I think with some residents that we heard from the night hearings, I think it's the principle of the thing that they have to bear anything to, in other words, that they have to pay anything to, in effect, pay Duke. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes, and that's how we're proposing this. It does come through not only through the night hearings, but even in surveys that we conduct. One of the most vexing things for customers is to pay a fee to pay their bill.
Right.
But again, it is a convenience feature. We could say we're not going to let customers pay by credit card or debit card anymore. And I can assure you there'll be more customers who are upset about that, right? We're trying to make things easier and more convenient for today's economy. And that includes providing the means to pay by credit card or debit card. And because there's a fee associated with it, a fee that we do not benefit from, we think it is appropriate to satisfy those customer conveniences to treat it like the other costs associated with the other payment channels.
And I realize you say the company doesn't get any of that, and you've been very clear on that. But by your projections, how much will this fee impact each Progress Energy customers, Progress residential customers' bill?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but Witness Quick.
Quick, okay.
We'll have that.
Well, I've got another one that you may punt to Witness Quick also. What percentage do you think the credit card adoption will increase by, or what numbers do you think that you project it to increase for the Progress? I think I asked you this same question for the DEC territory, but for the Progress territory.
Yeah, I think it's 10%, but again, Witness Quick will correct me, I'm sure.
Okay, I'll make a note to ask her those. Couple more for you right quick. On page 25 of your testimony, Mr. Gartitego, and I'll give you just a minute to get there.
I'm there.
Okay, near the top, you say, you make a statement, I think, along about line 6. You talk about the cost of electricity in the Southeast dropped 2.6% from September 2017 to September 2018. Where did you get that data from, and what are you basing that on? Could you expound on that just a little bit?
Yes, that's based on real terms. So if you factor in inflation, you look at what the rates were in 2017 to what the rates are in September 2018, and you calculate it in real terms. That's the result of that.
Okay, so you're factoring in inflation and other...
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. And one more question for you, Mr. Gartitego. On on page 18 of your direct testimony, you talk about Duke recycling 78% of coal combustion byproducts in 2017. That's a pretty high number, or higher than I thought. I know in the past, utilities weren't able to recycle as much because there were certain other pollutants in the byproduct that disallowed or made you unable to recycle large portions like this. Could you talk about that just a second?
I'll defer that to Mr. Curran to give you more specifics on that. But again, this is about recycling in terms of, we're talking about beneficial use as well, and it's used in road construction. I know some of it has been used at our tarmac at the Asheville Airport, for example. But Witness Curran can give you more detail around that.
Make a note of that to ask him that as well. Last question for you, and if you need to let Ms. Bateman jump in on this one, feel free, since I've kind of left her out. But you have a breakdown on page where you cite a lot of commission orders on page 14 of your direct testimony that are things that are included. And I'm familiar with a lot of the orders they're in recent years, going back to 2013. But you got one that goes way back before my time here, into 2001, and it dealt with costs associated with filing notices of application and withdrawal, along with other utilities in the state, to form an RTO. Of course, we don't have an RTO here, and there's all kind of chatter about all kind of things going on. But if you could tell us, I think Ms. Bateman may have that in her chart, but tell us what that was, how much of that in dollars is attributable to that order, and where, what that might entail. And if you want to pull Ms. Bateman in, certainly.
Yeah, I don't want her to feel left out.
Right.
Yeah, so the RTO is often called Grid South. That might ring a bell. So Duke Energy Carolinas, Duke Energy Progress, and SCE&G all had deferred costs related to this project to explore developing a regional RTO in the area. And then, as it says here, we submitted an application and then a withdrawal. And so all three companies had deferred costs that needed to be recovered from customers. Duke Energy Progress, because we went so long without a rate case, and then deferred these costs in the last rate case. I believe we're the only one that still has these costs left on our books. And I do have the amount.
Yeah, if you could.
Yeah.
I think it's in.
So the Grid South deferred balance is $3,676,000.
Thank you, Ms. Bateman. Thank you, Mr. Gartitego. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Bell, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr.
Good afternoon.
Gartitego, I'm sorry. In your pre-filed testimony and also in your summary, you made several references that the company is complying with state and federal regulations requiring the company to address coal ash. Can you tell me what those state and federal regulations are? Use their common names if you need to.
Yes, the federal CCR rules, or coal combustion residual rules.
Right.
That's EPA rules. And then the North Carolina Coal Ash Management Act. In South Carolina, there is no promulgated rule except for general Clean Water Act type rules. But we do have a consent agreement with the Department of Health and Environmental Control that dictates how we're going to address our coal combustion residuals.
How did that consent order come about?
I don't know. That was before, I think it was before my tenure. But as I understand it, the similar agreement was entered into with other utilities in the state.
I reckon I'm wanting to know who initiated the discussion on the consent agreement.
We may have been the ones who approached DHEC about how they intended or wanted us to deal with the issue. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we were proactive and called them.
Let's see. In your summary, you mentioned automated phone calls to customers. What were those about?
So, particularly, that was, I think, specifically for the notice to the night hearings. We were required to provide notice, and we thought putting it in a newspaper, given the timing, would not have allowed enough customers to be aware of it. And so we initiated robocalls, as some call it. We don't think ours was as annoying as some of the other ones people get. But that was one way to reach out to customers, to invite them.
Did they go to all customers?
That was the goal, yes.
Sure about that?
Well, if we had their number, how about that? If we had their phone number.
Okay. I just don't think I got one or two. Didn't get any. And I think y'all got both of my numbers. Let's see. You addressed Mr. Irvin. Vegetation management practices. There were some discussions, several discussions during the night hearing. And I reckon I'm a little concerned where there is an easement, and there were a couple of people that talked about danger trees outside of the easement that Progress is now requiring to be cut. And one gentleman said that they were topped off and he couldn't salvage, and another one talked about trees in his yard. What's the authority for removing those trees outside the easement?
It's actually spelled out in the easement that in addition to having that right-of-way, we would have a right to also cut trees that are deemed to be danger trees, which are trees that may be outside the right-of-way but have a potential to fall on a line or in the right-of-way blocking access. And so,
blocking access?
Well, I'll let Mr. Oliver address that, but I think if it has the potential to fall into the right-of-way.
I do that all the time, too.
Yeah. So it's not just a question of falling on the line, but if there's a problem and you need to access the right-of-way, a tree blocking your way could make a difference between how quickly you restore power. But this is all spelled out in the easement itself.
Even in those easements that were engaged or executed back 30s and 40s, I think there was some testimony about the old easement.
I believe that.
Okay. There was one gentleman that talked about, about the call with FERC, and I think he had invited some people from Progress to join him on that call with FERC. Do you recall that?
I recall that, yes.
Do you know if those gentlemen did join in on that call?
I'm not aware that we were invited to join in on any call.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that. I'm trying to find his name now. Mr. Tuning and something.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Timmons from Timmonsville, I had a note that said he can't even read his meter, and that DEP told him it was up to the subcontractor who put the meter in. Did y'all happen to follow up on that?
We did, and we gave him some education on how to read the meter. I think we need to actually improve the information we have on our website, but that's actually available on the website as well. But I was surprised by that response. I don't know why we would refer him to a subcontract to help him read his meter.
Well,
because it is our meter,
I was wondering that too, because I went back and looked at the reg, and the reg says, actually it says upon request, but I didn't remember that part of it. Inform its customers as to the method of reading meters. So.
Exactly, and when we get new customers, we give them a sort of a welcome to the neighborhood kit that includes a customer bill of rights, and in there is also some information about meter reading, getting your meter checked upon request once a year or so. I was very surprised to hear him say that's the response he got.
There were one or two folks that said that they, or somebody had sent a letter to Ms. Good asking for the number of irrigation
Yes.
meters out there. Did y'all ever come up with a number on how many irrigation meters are in the
Yes, so that's the letter I refer to in my the supplemental Q&A that I did with council. The number is 513. He thought it should be higher. But again, when customers sign up, I don't think there's a category that says I'm an agricultural customer. So we did the research based on SIC codes, which is an industrial coding system for businesses. And that's how we determined that number. And Mr. Wheeler, who did the analysis or was part of that, can tell you more about how we went about identifying who were our agricultural customers.
For those irrigation pivot meters that some folks have wanted off of the medium general service, what's the new schedule that they were being told about?
I believe some of them, and again, Mr. Wheeler can help you with that. But for some, we do have a seasonal and intermittent service schedule, an SI schedule, that was beneficial to them, and that was the schedule that I believe we recommended to them.
Probably one of those, one or the other, either medium general service or seasonal, or
Yes.
maybe some on small general.
Yes. I mean, I think. Again, we were just addressing the medium general service, the MGS class. So they would be moving from there to SGS, yes, or SI, the seasonal intermittent.
With regard to the, you mentioned some disagreement with, I believe, ORS's adjustment to remove some dues of Chamber of Commerce or other kind of community dues. Would you agree that a corporation such as Duke, that it's very important to be seen as a good corporate citizen?
I hear that all the time.
Is it only going to be a good corporate citizen if the ratepayers pay all the bills?
No, the shareholders
I'm not
pay.
trying to be argumentative.
No.
This is kind of figuring out who's responsible for what in this situation.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, our shareholders do pay a lot. As I mentioned, we just gave a $1 million grant to the technical colleges to train workers, not all of whom may ever work at Duke. That's part of our contribution to making this the great state that it is. I'll tell you, there are lots of industries in this state that we have been on the front lines of getting them into the state. We spend a lot in economic development work to attract these businesses to the state. That's all part of being a good corporate citizen. There are businesses in various cities that call me all the time. We want you to contribute to this or that, much of which we do, and ratepayers don't pay for that.
But doesn't that benefit Duke in the long run too, especially if they're in your area, that they're going to be a new customer?
It benefits customers as well because there are more customers to spread our cost over.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Bateman, you're off the hook this afternoon. Thank you for being here.
I did want to, do you still have a question about which of my exhibits kind of represents the
I'm going to
current
dig back
position?
through it. I was just kind of going through all those, getting lost in some of them, but
Okay.
thank you very much.
I could help clarify.
I really was trying to find the most updated Schedule 2 that broke out all the classes.
That's a great question because we have not updated Schedule 2.
Oh, okay.
So
Maybe that's why I couldn't find it.
my response is that the company would propose to allocate to the customer classes whatever increases ultimately granted proportionally to my original Exhibit 2. Okay. And I believe I looked at Michael Seaman-Wynn's exhibit. I believe he took a similar approach. I mean, obviously we disagree on the total amount, but I think we're on the same page in terms of how to spread it to the customer classes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. My watch just told me it was time to stand up for 10 minutes. So it's that or face plant. So we're going to take about 10 minutes and we'll be back.